Greetings YouTube, this is Boss Jinbe here, setting sail with you on yet another One Piece video today. Today we're going to be discussing the top 10, or at least my top 10, personal favorite or best moments in Wano so far. I think Wano has been an underrated arc up to this point. I actually have it in my top 10 One Piece arcs up to this point. I'll discuss my favorite arcs or what I think are the best arcs so far in the series in a separate video, but suffice it to say I do already have Wano in the top 10. Now that could fall off with a really horrible ending, but I think just the sheer volume and quality of a lot of the moments we've gotten so far have been stellar. I do think that the arc has been underrated because we're living it in real time, and because of some of the issues people have had with pacing around the time of the Oden flashback. Well, I personally loved the flashback. I think it was great. I do understand that pulling away from the main cast for an extended period of time, along with some of the breaks involved at the time, can wear on people a little bit. But I think if you read Act 1, Act 2 as a whole, and then we're going to be able to eventually reread Wano as a whole, I think a lot of it is actually going to flow really well. We're going to be able to see the big picture a little better. And I think a lot of these moments are really going to stand out. But I wanted to highlight my top 10 moments in Wano so far up through chapter 985. So this will be your spoiler warning. I will be spoiling things up through chapter 985. So if you haven't read that chapter yet, I suggest you do so now because I will be spoiling it going forward. So before we get into my personal top 10, I do just want to make a mention of the Oden flashback as a whole. The Oden flashback is not going to be mentioned or appear on this list. No, none of the scenes in it are going to be mentioned among my top 10 favorite moments from Wano, simply due to the fact that the flashback as a whole, in a lot of ways, is one really long scene. And there are just so many moments from the flashback that I absolutely loved that it could almost have a top 10 of its own. If I were to start including it on this list, they could start slotting anywhere between 2 through 6, even 7, maybe even more. And a lot of those would be made up solely of things from the Oden flashback. So I'm trying to take the Wano story in the present day and give you my top 10 moments from that. And then I'd like to discuss the Oden flashback in a little more depth in perhaps a later future video. Discuss some of my favorite moments, some of the themes I see in it, some of the parallels to the future story that I think Oda might be trying to utilize. So just suffice it to say, there won't be mention of any of the Oden flashback moments here, but you know, I love so many moments from it. Things like the crew arriving at Laugh Tale, finding the One Piece, then going to Sky Island, Oden versus Whitebeard versus Roger versus Whitebeard, meeting Toki. There were just so many really cool moments in that flashback that we'll discuss it at a later time. But alright, enough stalling. It's time to get into my top 10 favorite moments or scenes from Wano so far. Number 10 is actually going to be a relatively recent reveal, and that would be Yamato's initial announcement in the story and his subsequent reveal as Kaido's son. Quick note here, I will be using him in this context just because Yamato does seem to want to be referred to as Oden, or does seem to want to emulate Oden, and we haven't gotten clear justification on that. He's been referred to both as Kaido's son and Kaido's daughter within the story, so until we get a little bit more clarification, I will be using he here just for consistency's sake, but I do think it is much more of a gray area than with somebody like, say, Kiku. The first mention and then reveal of Yamato was very cool, especially within the community, because it did spark a ton of theory videos and conversation. Is he going to be strong? Is he going to be weak? Is he old? Is he young like Momonosuke? Is he going to be a potential Straw Hat crew member? Is he going to be the ace of Kaido's crew? There are just so many theories and speculations that have sprung from this character, and he has really been a game changer for the plot at this point. Also, Oda did give us a pretty quick turnaround on the actual subsequent reveal of Yamato after his initial mention. He did it in a really stylish way with the Thunder Bagua reenactment on Ulti, which was just a great scene overall, and Yamato seems like a very interesting character so far. I do want to see more before I really make any strong judgments on the character, but if I had to say so far, he's been a very interesting addition to Wano and potentially to the Straw Hat crew as a whole. Number 9 on my list is going to be the scene with the Smile Fruit reveal and Yasuo's death. So Yasuo was a character that I didn't really care for initially when he was introduced. He did seem a little bit annoying and to be a bit of a side character, but quickly prior to his death he did grow on me a lot. And actually just rereading back some of the scenes with him, and now in the anime that he's been appearing, his character does actually seem much more interesting than I gave him credit for initially. And he actually was a little bit more involved as the story went along than I initially thought. even up until the time of his death. And then now looking back on it with the Oden flashback adding more context, his death is actually pretty powerful, and even at the time was pretty shocking to see him crucified and shot point blank and executed in public by Orochi. And we did have the scene with Kanjuro taking his body away, so we may not have actually had full closure on the things regarding Yasuo yet. Is he going to come back as potentially a zombie with Moria's shadow power at some point, like some people are speculating if Moria does show up? We don't really know, but up to this point, his death and then the subsequent explanation of the smile fruits, why he and Otoko and the people of Ebisu Town have the permanent smiles on their face, and what the actual smile fruits do, was a pretty phenomenal world-building moment. It added more weight to the story and the plight of the Wano people in general. It added to Orochi's character and how much of a scumbag he is. It added to Kaido's character as far as the extent to which he will go to gain power for the Beast Pirate crew. It adds more to Doflamingo's character, to Caesar's character, just across the board. The reveal and the explanation of the side effects of the smile fruits and why they're called smile fruits was an excellent reveal and very well done moment in Wano so far. Now, number 8 on this list is a spoiler from the most recent chapter. So again, if you have not read this chapter, I suggest that you pause the video for, a minute or so, because I will be spoiling. And number 8 is going to be the death of Orochi. Quote-unquote, death of Orochi, where Kaido pulls out King's sword in the middle of his speech and immediately decapitates Orochi. Now, whether this ends up sticking around or not is up for debate, and I'm sure we're hopefully going to find out soon, and until then we're going to argue about it back and forth in the community. Does seem to be about a 2-to-1 split, maybe 3-to-1 split, people thinking he's not dead versus people who think he actually is. But even if not, and there's the meme about death in One Piece and how Oda could literally decapitate somebody right in front of us and we still won't believe it. And we have seen things like that with, Doflamingo getting decapitated, Crocodile technically getting decapitated at Marineford, things like that. We saw it with Kanjuro being decapitated earlier in Wano, and that turned out to be an ink clone, which some people think this might be. So we're taking this scene with the biggest grain of salt, but that doesn't take away from the shock of the moment when it occurred. It was very well executed. Nobody really saw it coming, at least not in that moment. And it added a lot to Kaido's character and threw another monkey wrench in the story that none of us saw coming. And I think that was an excellent moment in Wano so far, even though it just happened very, very recently. We haven't had a chance to really sit on it yet. Number 7 on my list is going to be when Jinbe arrived and the full Straw Hat crew was finally able to come together post-time skip. Post-time skip, we have had the original 9 come together at some point earlier in the Wano Arc, but with the arrival of Jinbe and his official full introduction into the crew, minus, his toast, which is a bit of a flag for me that I'm trying not to think about right now. But, with his arrival, the extent of which he may have actually lost some of his crew or perhaps has an injury that we don't know about in order to make it back. There's that storyline that's still sitting out there, and we're just not sure why Oda didn't bring him back right away. We haven't really fully seen the payoff of that yet. But his arrival, I think, was very well executed and an interesting moment in the story. And seeing the crew happy and together and calling him boss and just that great reunion moment before really starting this raid on Onigashima was just a phenomenal moment. And it's been great since then, seeing Jinbe interact with different members of the crew. Like I said, them calling him boss, some of his dynamics with Robin especially have been great. So yeah, my boy Jinbe arriving and forming the full 10-man Straw Hat crew up to this point is my number 7 best moments in Wano so far. Moving on to number 6, we have another pair of scenes that flowed together or worked together to create just one overall awesome moment in the story. And that was Kaido and Big Mom's fight on Onigashima and then their subsequent alliance. I mean, my gosh, we don't get to see Emperor clashes very often in One Piece. And unfortunately in the story, we really only get to see them clash. We don't even really get to see the major fights. The closest thing we had to a full fight between two quote-unquote emperors is probably Luffy versus Kaido earlier in the arc, with Luffy sort of being the pseudo 5th emperor, but that was not much of a fight. That was Luffy beating on Kaido and having no effect, and then just getting smoked. And we did have Whitebeard versus Teach, although at that point Teach wasn't a Yonko. He was going to become one after the war, after he took the Double Fruit, but technically that's two characters who are emperors at a time that had a bit of a fight. So I guess you can kind of count that in a way. But outside of that, we really only have clashes. Like we had the clash with Whitebeard and Shanks, and then we had this clash with Big Mom and Kaido, which is just, it's still awesome to see. It was a reenactment of that scene that I mentioned with Whitebeard and Shanks, where you see the sky split and there's the clash of the conquerors, and just seeing them go at it was awesome. And then going back to that scene and seeing them drunk apparently and teaming up completely reshapes the dynamic of Wano and the New World as a whole. It creates a storyline I don't think many of us saw coming, outside of people who were maybe speculating about the existence of the Rocks crew, which, ended up being correct, that Kaido and Big Mom were members on the same crew. And just as an aside here, I won't be mentioning any of the in-between Reverie or going back to Reverie kind of storylines as part of the Wano arc. I consider those kind of extensions of the Reverie arc or interludes. So none of those moments would be mentioned here as well. So we're not going to get the bounty reveal as a moment here as well. I just figured I'd mention that here. And I don't think many people thought that Big Mom and Kaido would actually ally in the future or in a present storyline. So seeing that happen was a bit mind-blowing, just the power dynamic that creates. And it just adds more grandiosity to the story that we didn't really need, but I think it's been a welcome addition. It has really ramped up the Wano arc even beyond what it was at the time. The next moment, number 5, that I want to discuss was Luffy's speech in chapter 949 to the Udon prisoners. I think this scene is actually a little bit underrated, or kind of started to be lost in the shuffle of the story, but I think it was an excellent show of growth and character development from Luffy. It was a very understandable and relatable character progression for him, and I think it was just an amazing speech, which you don't get too often in One Piece, especially from some of our good guy characters. It's where Luffy was able to confront the prisoners who seem to have given up, and tells them that, even if he's an outsider, that they're living like slaves and that they stopped moving once Oden was defeated 20 years ago, and their spirits were broken, and that he's here now to defeat Kaido and take up their struggles, and it doesn't matter if he's not from Wano. And it was just an amazing moment, because Luffy's always been the person to often say, I'm not the hero, I'm not here to help people, things like that, but he always ends up helping those he cares about. And in this case, he did make a promise to Tama, who was related to Ace or had that relationship with Ace. And he is doing it on somewhat of a personal level, but he's making a public proclamation of it. And he doesn't do these very often, outside of, saying, I'm going to kick someone's ass, blah, blah, blah. But he doesn't usually do it to rally others, to inspire others. He's usually much more personal, does it to rally his crew or his close friends. But he doesn't go out there and give these grandiose speeches very often. And this is a type of character progression that may be alluding to something that he got from his father. You think Dragon, as the head of the Revolutionary Army, may have some of these characteristics in him as well, to be able to inspire those around him. And Luffy's always kind of done that with his actions, as was mentioned in Marineford by Mihawk, but seeing him do it with his words here and kind of taking that role upon himself was very, very cool. I do think this was a little bit of an extension of some of what he was doing with Doflamingo in Dressrosa, where he was confronting Doflamingo about being a puppet master and always wanted to control people, control the strings of his city and his kingdom, and how that irked Luffy. And, outside of just his personal reasons for wanting to beat Doflamingo on behalf of Law and his crew, he just seemed to fundamentally disagree with how Doflamingo lived and operated, and wanted to go after him for that as well. So this was just a great character progression moment for Luffy. And so his speech in the Udon prison mines to the prisoners when they were dealing with all the poison and everything, I just think that was an excellent moment, and it definitely makes my top 5 in Wano so far. The number 4 moment on my list is a bit more of a meathead pick, but I think it was just an amazing moment in the manga and a phenomenal scene in the anime. I think that they animated it very well. It was a great way to start the arc and to introduce us to the new animation that we were going to be having in the anime and how the story was going to be going forward. And that would be the opening fight scene with Zoro, when he was supposed to commit seppuku and then used the blade to carve up the executioners and the magistrate and the enemies there. I think the anime did this very well with the animation, with the fighting style, with the choreography. I just think it was an excellent fight scene and a really good opening scene or appetizer into the Wano arc as a whole. The number 3 best moment or scene for me in my Wano list is going to be the arrival of Kaido as a mother effing dragon, and his arrival in the sky and then his subsequent stomping of Luffy. This was just a scene that showed everybody that we're not in the same old new world anymore. We're in yet another Yonko's territory. This is a Yonko who's not as distracted as Big Mom. He takes things perhaps a little bit more seriously or handles things a little bit more directly than Big Mom does. Big Mom was often more content letting her subordinates do things on her behalf and giving orders, while Kaido does seem to have a little bit more of a hands-on and direct approach. So that scene of him arriving in his full dragon form, freaking everybody out, us still not knowing if it's a dragon Zoan or if he is a dragon, and then just seeing Luffy attempt to fight him and maybe seemingly doing a little bit of work, but Kaido then taking no damage from it, and then he just functionally one-shot Luffy. That was just absolutely mind-blowing, and Kaido completely threw off the tone of the story, with Luffy losing that quickly, getting beat that badly, that early into the arc. It especially after Luffy having been crowned the unofficial 5th Emperor of the Sea, it was just an amazing scene and completely, reworked the dynamic in Wano again. I mean, Oda's been great at throwing these curveballs into the arc. I think that's one reason it's been so great, is what we knew or what we thought we knew or how we thought the dynamics going into the arc and through the arc constantly keep shifting. Like I said, with the Big Mom and Kaido alliance, reworking the power structure. Luffy getting smoked so quickly by Kaido, someone who we thought by the end of the arc, Luffy maybe would be able to take on one-on-one or just with a little bit of help. But just seeing the gap again, which we didn't have as much of a definitive gap between Luffy and Big Mom and Whole Cake. There was a gap, but it wasn't anywhere to the degree that we've seen evidenced here between him and Kaido. So yeah, that's my number 3 best moment in the arc so far. So yeah, moving on to number 2. My number 2 and my number 1 best moments are actually pretty similar, and I had a little bit of a hard time deciding between them, but I just think that they were just phenomenal moments that maybe aren't fully unique to the Wano arc as a whole, but they occurred during the Wano arc, and they're just scenes that I absolutely love to see, and I remember looking back on fondly, and just kind of made me happy when I was reading them in the moment. So they're going to be my top 2. They may not be yours. They may not even make your top 10 list, but so be it. These are my top 2 favorite moments from Wano so far. Number 2 is going to be the Zoro and Sanji reunion, when they meet up after the execution of Yasuo, and they go to protect Toko. And it was just an incredible scene because it had been hundreds and hundreds of chapters, I think over 200 chapters, since we last saw Zoro and Sanji together. And I think it had been over 6 years without them having interacted together, which is a little bit mind-blowing for the story of One Piece. Just think how much time post-time skip has been spent with the crew as a whole not being together, and then specifically Zoro and Sanji not seeing each other because they missed each other on Zou. But just seeing them reunite here to protect somebody and combine their strength, even though there is still that tension and the attitude between each other. And you get to realize that, in the story it was only a couple of months, but it was still an epic reunion just because it had been so long for us as readers. And Oda seemed to know that and really gave that panel, gave that spread its due, its just desserts. And I really hope that the anime does this well, because it was an amazing scene and could be some great visuals. So then briefly, before we move on to my number 1 best moment in One Piece, I just want to drop a couple of honorable mentions. These are a couple of moments that, were great or epic, but for some reason or another just didn't measure up to my other top 10 that I have on my list. I think having such strong honorable mentions does lend credence to my argument that Wano is a top 10 arc so far, because these are some amazing moments that didn't even make my top 10, and I could have easily made a top 20 and still not have included anything from the Oden flashback. And I think any of those top 20 could measure up very well against any of the other arcs or major arcs or sagas so far in the story. So just some of these honorable mentions, and these aren't actually in any particular order. It's just going to be a couple of things I wanted to to mention that I did really enjoy, just weren't quite there. It'd be things like revealing Kanjuro as the traitor. I think that was a great reveal. That we thought one of the Akazaya 9 might have been Kanjuro, or might have been the traitor, and maybe Kanjuro was one of them, but having it officially revealed in the rain with the betrayal was just very well done. The subsequent Denjiro reveal is Kyoshiro. A lot of people did speculate that one, and the anime opening spoiled it, which is absurd, but we'll ignore that for now. But that was a great reveal, right after the moment with Kanjuro. I know it did come at the tail end of the Oden flashback when people had a little bit of fatigue, but I still think it was very well done. I really do like the character of Kyoshiro, or Denjiro, how his body became a physical manifestation of the rage he was feeling after Oden's execution. Another good moment, not great, but I think it was an interesting moment in the story, was the death of Komurasaki. I don't think a lot of us actually believed she was dead at that time. There was a lot of speculation that she was in fact Hiyori, but it was still an interesting scene in the manga and animated, and to see Orochi transform and get attacked, and then have Kyoshiro cut her down, and us speculate, is Kyoshiro good? Is he bad? Are they playing him? And then, we did immediately almost see that she was alive, but I still think it was a little bit of a very interesting scene. Especially, with her confronting Orochi and kind of showing some of that samurai spirit that she inherited from her father. Another honorable mention would be Marco's arrival in the story and kicking off of Big Mom's ship. I did only want to mention one of the arrivals. I did think that, that would be a little bit redundant if I had like Jinbe's arrival, if I had Marco's arrival, things like that. So I did have to pick one. I had to go with my boy Jinbe, just because he's an official member of the crew, and we got to see the crew together as a whole, all 10 members. But Marco's arrival was awesome. He's actually one of my favorite characters in the story, outside of like the main cast and everything. So just seeing him arrive and do a reenactment of King's kicking off of Big Mom's ship was hilarious. And I really liked his little speech to them at the end, that, when they make it back up here, this era might have changed. So then moving on to my number one favorite moment in Wano so far, and that would have to be the reunion of Luffy and Zoro. It had been a while since Luffy and Zoro had been together, and not as long as Zoro and Sanji. And Sanji is my favorite Straw Hat after Luffy, but Luffy and Zoro go back to the first couple chapters of One Piece, and you live with these characters for so long. I've been reading the story for coming up on a decade here soon. I watched the anime for almost that long as well, and you've been with these characters for so long, and just seeing them interact and seeing them happy together and seeing these reunion moments after they've been apart for years in story, it seems, it's just it was amazing. It was a great scene. You kind of see the joy in Luffy's face. It kind of emulated some of the joy the community had seeing these characters interact together. And it's just one of those scenes that kind of reminds you why you love One Piece, or what these characters kind of mean to you. So it just, I love this story. I love these characters. So that's just going to be my top favorite moment from the Wano arc so far. But anyway, that has been my top 10 best or favorite moments and scenes from the Wano arc up through chapter 985. So, partway through Act 3. So I'd love to know what some of your top 10 are in the comments below. Let me know if you think I'm way off base with any of these, or if you agree with my top 10. If you think there's anything I missed, even among my honorable mentions. I'd love to hear any thoughts you guys have on this, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care now.